Hi everyone, today I'm giving you 10 top tips on taking your macro filmmaking and photography on your smartphone from this to this. And to do that, I'll be using Moment's new T-Series macro lens, which is a 10 times magnification. Now, before we even get into these tips, I would highly recommend you get a professional filmmaking app for filmmaking and photography on your phone. Now, I'm using currently a Blackmagic Pro camera app, which is free, but it does not have photography. If you want to go into something that has photography as well, then I highly recommend the Cinema P3 Pro camera app, which gives you photography and filmmaking, and that's about £10. Or you can look at Moment's Pro camera app, which is about £7, I believe. That gives you the ability to shoot photos, time lapses, and filmmaking as well. Now, this is why you don't want to use the macro lens on your native camera app. So you see here, I've got the ultra wide selected. If I go to wide, and then to telephoto, it's still on this macro lens. It's not really changing to what we want it to be. And if we go to 3 times, it's just doing nothing. But there you see a flick of the telephoto lens being covered by, again there, by the cover, so you don't want to use your native app. Tip number 1 is to use manual focus to avoid your autofocus hunting. So here you can see that we've got a bit of movement in the shot. And as we're moving, that autofocus is changing. You can see the numbers on that changing massively. So we don't want to have that fluctuation in focus. We want to have a nice, clean, sharp focus on whatever our particular subject is. So let's change that to manual by tapping on auto. And now we have full control over the focus. So as I move in, we can move this focus now to be deeper or more shallow depth of field. That's the kind of control that you get by using a professional filmmaking app or photography app as opposed to your native app. Regardless of what's in shot and what's in focus, that focus isn't changing, and that's what you want. Tip number 2 is to make the most out of your focus peaking feature on your smartphone filmmaking app or photography app. Now we're going to use the focus peaking just the same way as we would do with normal filmmaking without the lens. So get that focus peaking onto your app, and then you're able to find a way where you can get the focus absolutely spot on without necessarily just using the manual focus. It's a really good assist that you can change the color on Blackmagic camera app, and I believe on Cinema P3 Pro camera app as well, and it gives you focus anywhere, anytime. It doesn't always work in macro, but most of the time it does. Tip number 3 is if you have one, use a tripod where possible. Now the tripod that I'm using for this video is the Sandmark tripod. This is an extremely versatile tripod, which I'll put a link for in the description down below. It has a ball head mount, which means that you can move your phone and the phone clamp in any position you want to. So whether you're filming something that's low down, high up, at an angle, awkward angles, you can set up a really steady shot with this tripod, and legs move independently from each other and have 3-4 different levels of movement as well in terms of height. And you can do that individually to get in, again, to awkward angles without having to actually kind of be handshaking at a really awkward angle yourself. Now with this macro lens being a 10 times magnification, it of course magnifies your hand movements and hand jitters by 10 times. So going handheld with the macro lens is extremely difficult for video. It's much easier for photos because obviously you can just take as many photos as you want till you get it right. But when filmmaking, using a tripod, as you can see here, it makes all the difference. And it gives you a nice steady shot, even if the subject in front of you, like a plant, is kind of waving in the wind, it makes it much more stable. Tip number 4 is to use stabilization on normal mode on standard, rather than using it on cinematic, extreme, and even off. You're gonna have a fair few shakes in the shot. It's just gonna be happening. It's really difficult not to in macro. It's almost impossible, to be honest. But then if we move this stabilization into standard, it crops in slightly. It does give you a little bit more of a stable shot. And tip number 5 is to use the sunlight behind transparent subjects. Now, if you film in front of the plant or whatever your subject is with the sun behind you, you're gonna block out that sunlight, or at least parts of it, and I'm completely blocking out the sunlight in that shot. But if you get behind the plant, even though this is a very awkward angle, it is very difficult to get this shot, you get behind it and you can see every detail with the light shining right through these plants, these leaves, and it gives you something completely otherworldly that you wouldn't be able to get with any other lens otherwise. Even with the regular macro lens that's kind of built into your ultra wide angle on the iPhone 15 Pro at least, it just doesn't give you this clarity and this close-upness with your shots. Now when it comes to macro photography or filmmaking on a phone, you really want the subject that's nearest to you in the camera lens and in focus to pop from the background. So if you have green on green or brown on brown, it's not going to stand out at all, and it might be even hard to figure out what it is people are looking at. So make sure you get a bit more of a different colour background to what's in the foreground. So here, yellow and green are completely opposite colours on the colour wheel. So find areas like this in your photography and filmmaking where you can make the colours stand out and pop from each other, making your subject ultimately pop out and stand out in a really otherworldly way and get a nice, clean, crisp focus with a manual focus. And as a bonus tip, if you really want to make your shots and filmmaking stand out, get shots through plants and undergrowth to give you a worm's eye or ant's eye view of the world. We're getting a little bit more advanced now. If you like a challenge, use your macro lens over your built-in telephoto lens. So this is the macro lens on the 1x built-in wide-angle lens. You can see you get some really nice details on this rounded log. And because it's round, the central area that's in focus is leaving everything else blurred out. If you've got a flat subject, everything will be in focus. Now with the macro lens over the telephoto lens of the iPhone 15 Pro, you have the 3x tele lens mixed with the 10x macro, so you're effectively getting 13x magnification on your image, capturing absolutely stunning detail in your shots. Your wide-angle lens that's built into your phone uses 48 megapixels, at least on my iPhone 15 Pro here. However, if you're using a telephoto lens or ultra-wide, which I wouldn't use, you'll then be using 12 megapixels, capturing less detail, meaning you've got less room to crop in post-production. Next up in the tips is to use small movements if you're using handheld shots to pan or track across a subject. Now the reason I'd always suggest using a short span of movement, whether it's tracking or panning with a macro lens, is because it actually exaggerates the movement so much that if you do a long tracking shot, as I show you here. Now even with the focus locked as we have here, it's very hard over a long distance doing a tracking shot to maintain the same distance between yourself and your subject, so it's best to use a short distance. Now let's try that exact same thing again, but instead of doing it over about a meter, let's do it for about 10 centimeters. Now because we are using a macro lens, we don't have to cover that long a distance to make a nice looking shot. So it takes quite a few goes to get this right, because as I say, you're trying to maintain that same distance to the subject, but it's much easier. And lastly, tip number 10 is to find yourself a subject that moves. Now in a tiny world like the world of macro, you're going to want to use an insect. So if you use something like a bird, obviously you're not going to be able to capture that. But with an insect, you can get so much detail of their movement, whether it's antennae and things like that, their little legs, how the body moves. You can capture that really, really well with a macro lens, particularly this moment, 10x macro lens, and you can use the diffusion filter, if you like, to get a little bit of that harsh sunlight, if it's a really sunny day, off of your subjects. Overall, I've been really impressed with Moment's 10x T-Series macro lens. It gets a really beautiful image out of your phone, something that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise, and it really does allow you to get inside a completely different world and see the world in a completely different way. It gets a nice sharp image when you use focus peaking and your manual focus. You can choose where you want that focus to be. If you want to learn more about the app that I was using today for this video, Blackmagic Camera app, then do have a look at that right here for my tutorial, my full tutorial. And if you want to check out Moment's own Pro Camera app, which is very good as well, comes at about £7, do check that out right here, right now as well. Bye-bye.